Legend has it that in the 4th century BC, a young man from a small town in northern Greece heard rumors of the great Plato and Plato's academy, the man whose ideas were changing the world, and the academy that was the epicenter of education, all for a one-way ticket via camelback to Athens, Greece. So at just 17, the young man packed his bags and made the pilgrimage hundreds of miles to learn from the great Plato. He would stay 20 years. His name was Aristotle, and his pilgrimage would prove to be one of the most influential in human history. In the 1930s, a certain physicist accepted a role in Princeton, New Jersey. All sorts of people, from students to scientists, poets to politicians, would make the pilgrimage to meet the modest man with a brilliant brain and wiry white hair, Albert Einstein. His reputation had rippled all the way to America, and before he knew it, nobodies were knocking at his door, and large crowds were filling lecture halls just to get into the same room. Is the genius the real deal? The genius had arrived, and everyone wanted to know for themselves, is he true? Is he as smart as they say he is? In the 1980s, my dad recalls studying at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem. During his time, many students began flocking to the university, making the pilgrimage there to learn under a new popular professor who had just been hired, Maya Angelou. The famed poet, author, activist, students, including my dad, would wait on a long wait list just to be in the same classroom as her, just to hear the way poetry seamlessly slipped off of her lips. My dad, to this day, says that is if not the biggest highlight of his college years. In the 1980s, a young college dropout entrepreneur made a pilgrimage to the office of Dr. Edwin Land. Land was a scientist and inventor of what you know as the Polaroid camera, the first camera to ever develop immediately. The young man who visited him recalls how Land spoke of the intersection between technology and beauty, science and art. And he was astonished, he was amazed, he was inspired. He said meeting Dr. Land was like meeting a national treasure. That young man's name was Steve Jobs. The pilgrimage paid off. In 2009, I went to New York City for the first time as a kid. The concrete jungle where dreams are made of. Millions of people to see, millions of things to do. And I wanted to go to one place and one place only and see one person and one person only. And it was in Hoboken, New Jersey, to Carlo's Bakery. Why? Because I spent a ridiculous amount of hours in 2009 watching TLC's reality television show, Cake Boss. While you were watching SportsCenter or the news or That's So Raven, I was watching Buddy Valestro balance a 4-layer cake with 10 seconds to go before the bride walked into the reception, dodging traffic with the tall cake in the back. I had to see if it was true. I needed to know if the fondant actually tasted good, if it was actually made of Rice Krispies. I wanted to make the pilgrimage to the person. My family said no. They said Broadway is far more appealing than the bakery. No offense to Buddy. There's something in the human heart that is unsatisfied with mere knowledge of reputation. If we hear someone is incredible, if we're inspired by him, we don't just want to hear about him. We want to see for ourselves. We want to bridge the gap. We want to make the pilgrimage to the person. Do they live up to the hype? Are they actually that smart? Is their voice actually that good? Can they jump high? Can they kick the ball that far? Are they actually creative, or is it just ChatGPT? Does she actually play 40 songs for 3 hours from every era? I don't know. I need to figure out. I need to see for myself, are you the real deal? When we are moved and inspired by someone's reputation, we want to see for ourselves, are you true? Are you real? We want to make the pilgrimage to the person. Now, why mention that? Because that is the story of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Perhaps the only sermon you'll ever hear in your life on the Queen of Sheba. There's 2 characters to understand. There's character number 1, Solomon, the king of Israel, the king of God's people, as what some people say the penultimate king, the son and successor to the great King David. Character number 2, the queen down south, the OG Spice Girl. She ran the spice trade. Sheba was not her name before you start calling her Queen Sheba. It was the place she ruled, which is in modern Yemen. I brought a map. What's important to understand when understanding this story is three things. Solomon's up north, she's down south. They're far away from each other. 1,500 miles separate them. That's like the distance from D.C. to Denver. B, his reputation has spread all the way down there. And keep in mind, they didn't have Reddit. There was no Twitter. And C, she is so intrigued by the reputation she hears that she calls her camel caravan and says, I'm making the journey. So what I want us to see with this story is two parts. A good king's example, and B, a greater king's grace. A good king's example, and B, a greater king's grace. Feel good about it? First, the good king's example. First, she sees that Solomon is reputable. Verse 1 says, the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon. Remember, this is 1,500 miles away. This is a long way. Word traveled far. People are talking. She's hearing. And what she's hearing is good. He's got a good reputation. His reputation is attractive, not repulsive. She wants to meet him. But notice the rest of verse 1. It says, the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord. What made his reputation so good was his God. His fame was for God's name. He wasn't out here trying to make a name for himself. He was making a name for God. He was spreading God's renown. Maybe you remember the movie Chariots of Fire from 1981. Captures two runners in the 1924 Olympics. For Harold Abrahams on the left, running was about proving himself. In the movie, he says, in 1 hour's time, I will be out there again. I will raise my eyes and look down the corridor 4 feet wide with 10 lonely seconds to justify my existence. That's running for his own fame. Eric Liddell on the right had a different motive. He said, I run to glorify God. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. One, their fame was for their own name. The other, Eric, my fame, for him. I remember as a kid, my dad would read me books by John Wooden. If you're a basketball fan, maybe you know him, perhaps the most winning coach ever in basketball, college basketball. And my dad would not read me playbooks or strategy books of how to be a better basketball player. He would read me books by John Wooden, who talked about how all of his fame was for God's name. One of his best quotes says this, I have always tried to make it clear, basketball is not the ultimate. It is of small importance in comparison to the total life we live. There is only one kind of life that truly wins, coming from the biggest winner ever. And that is the one that places faith in the hands of the Savior. Similarly, Solomon is not ruling for himself. He's ruling for God's renown. It's not for his name, it's for God's name. And when a leader has a reputation that's rock solid and selfless and incredible, and for God's fame and not their own, you want to get near them. People gravitate towards them. 3 times in the first 2 verses, it says the queen came, and she came. In other words, the repetition is supposed to grab your attention. That she hears about his reputation, and it's so good, she's willing to make the journey all the way, all those 1,500 miles. It's like going from here to Denver. She needed to see if it was true, if he was the real thing. The first point that I want all of us to pull out of this is that a good leader is reputable. A good leader is reputable for the right reasons. They're well thought of, they're respected, they're trustworthy. People talk about them, people hear about them, and what people hear about them is good. And they're not just reputable for their resume, the amount of projects they've completed or wins they have, but they're reputable for their character. There's an inward quality about them that attracts people towards them. They have a humility that draws others towards themselves. They have a fame that's not for their name, that's for God's name. You want to be that kind of leader. I want to be that kind of leader. And here's some questions maybe just to consider. Am I a reputable leader? When people hear about me from a distance, what story do they hear? Does my reputation attract people or repel them? Is my fame for God's name? If someone only knew me by what others were talking about me, would God be mentioned? Does my reputation make people curious about God or just impressed with me? Do I use success to build my brand or to make God's name known? Does my reputation travel far because of hype or humility? Am I a reputable leader? Solomon was. It's the kind of leader you want to be. But Solomon wasn't just reputable, he was also intellectual. That's number two. He had an intellect that satisfied. He's wise. He knows how the world works and how to work within it. Verse 1 says, she came to test him. She came all these miles to test him with hard questions. She's like, okay, I hear you're smart. Let's put you to the test. Many commentators translate hard questions as riddles. Perhaps what comes to mind is The Princess Bride. You know the famous scene, the battle of wits. I challenge you to a battle of wits. For the princess, to the death. I accept. Good, then pour the wine. Perhaps you think of The Hobbit. I'm reading it for the first time. You know, you have the riddle battle between Gollum and Bilbo, and one asks a riddle, the other answers. Voiceless it cries, wingless it flutters, toothless it bites, mouthless it mutters. What is it? The wind. Okay, you're good to go. But I think it's more than just a riddle fight. I think she comes with a mix of questions. Some mix that's poetic, practical, political, and philosophical. How does the world work? How do I work within it? How do I solve this problem? How do I manage this tension? What are your thoughts on foreign trade policy? What do you think about that war going on over there? How does a nation thrive? What kind of government setup is best for human flourishing? Why is there something instead of nothing? Is there a God? Does he care about me? What's life after death? Solomon explained these things to me. But I also think there's a personal level to her questions. Verse 2 says, she told him all that was on her mind. Not just her country or her nation's mind, but her mind. Why am I sad and anxious? Why am I mad and aggravated? Why did this thing happen to me as a child? Why does it feel like I can't win in life? Why am I right here and right now? Why, Solomon, help me? What we don't know is what she asked, but what we do know is the outcome. Verse 3, Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. Simply put, his intellect satisfied her. He wasn't intimidated by her curiosity, he helped satisfy it. He was a safe space for scary questions. I remember listening to a podcast once of probably one of the smartest people in the United States right now was talking about why he is not a Christian. And he said, because I grew up and I went to the Sunday school thing and I started asking harder questions and they went, tut, tut, tut. We don't do that here. You're not allowed to ask those questions. He needed a leader who leaned into his curiosity and not shut it down. He needed a safe space for scary questions. And the big point I want you to pull out right here is that a good leader is intellectual. A good leader is intelligent. Let me explain. You don't want to go on a tour when the tour guide hasn't read what they're touring. I did that recently. I was like, that is $15 down the drain. You don't want a pastor who refuses to study the scriptures or neglects commentaries. You don't want a politician who isn't well-versed in policy or the past. A good leader is informed. They're smart, not in the stale sense of I got a 36 on my ACT. No, they're learned in the sense that it brings life to those that they lead. A good leader has answers to hard questions to help people. It's not about holding up some award. It's about helping someone. They're not intimidated by curiosity. They're learners. They bury their nose in books, they study subjects, and they dwell on deep things. A good leader is intellectual. Some questions to consider. Am I an intellectual leader? Do I have satisfactory answers to a family member's hard questions about life and death? Do people trust me to brainstorm and solve problems? Do I seek to learn, or do I just settle with the easy answer that Google feeds me? Do I make space in my week to think deeply, or do I fill every quiet moment with a noise and a scroll? Do I help others think, or do I just try to win the argument? Do people leave conversations with me with more clarity or confusion? Am I approachable to someone with hard questions? Am I a safe place for someone with scary questions. A good leader is. They're intellectual. But when she visits Solomon, she doesn't find he's reputable, or just intellectual, but also third, that he's charitable. He looks out after those he leads. She finds that Solomon is charitable. Verse 5 says, the queen, she looked around and she saw the food of his table, the seating of his officials, the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his cupbearers. She looks around and sees the effects of all of his leadership, and it's good. He looks after his direct reports. He supplies their needs. He structures them all for the sake of flourishing. He wants the best for them, towards both the servant below him and the stranger who visits on a Tuesday afternoon. Look at the queen. Verse 8, queen sees his splendor. She looks at him, she says, happy are your men. Happy are your servants who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. She looks around and says, people are smiling. Everyone's happy. They like working for you. They love learning from you. And then he's also charitable with his money. Verse 13, Solomon gave to the queen all she desired. Why? Because his fame is not about making a bunch of money. His fame is for God's name. That means he's freed up to be generous. And she comes and his generosity blows her away. The point I want you to pull out here is a good leader's charitable. And I'm not talking about writing a tax cut charity check. I'm talking about charitable in the sense that you're kind, you're loving, you're generous, you're gracious. You look after those you lead. You have an eye for their interests. You know their needs. You make people who work for you or who are under you smile, happy. Do you remember the Titans? Such a good movie. I made Audrey watch it last weekend. It's so good. And the movie about a high school football team down the street in Alexandria, and you have defensive team captain Gary Bertier, all-American linebacker. He's talented, he's smart, but he lacks one thing: care for his teammates because of their skin color. And kind of in the pinnacle changing moment of the movie, he starts calling out the players underneath him. Why aren't you guys caring? Why aren't you playing so hard? You're not looking out for one another. And then Julius Campbell, my favorite character in the movie, comes to him, confronts him, and this quote has just been rocking me the past week from the movie. He said, because attitude reflects leadership. None of the people who follow you care because you don't care. A good leader cares. A good leader loves. And we've just been waking up each morning. I look at Audrey and I say, left side. She says, strong side. That doesn't happen. A good leader cares. They're charitable. They love. Questions to consider. Am I a charitable leader? Are the people that I lead happy? Have I asked them if they're happy? Do they feel seen or do they feel spent? Do people love to work for me or are they just waiting for someone to take my seat? Do they feel loved by me? Do I care about the flourishing of the people around me, or am I only just concerned with the next promotion or the next season or the next job for me? Am I kind and hospitable to the stranger, not just the person I work with? Do I share my resources freely, or do I hold them tightly? Am I a charitable leader? Solomon was. He's all three. Reputable, intellectual, charitable, and when the queen sees all three of those, when the Queen of Sheba travels 1,500 miles and sees all of those, she marvels. It says she's breathless. Verse 4, there was no more breath in her. One of my favorite memories of the past year is my sister and I were at like a hole-in-the-wall mom and pop Italian restaurant in a city. And Harry Styles happened to be at the table next to us. And keep in mind, for context, my sister was a 23-year-old single woman at the moment. And she doesn't know the whole meal. It's clicked with me. And then finally he wraps up and he leans across our table to hand the waiter who was waiting both tables the tip. And my sister just froze. And then he walked away and she looks at me, she says, "Was that?" And I said, "Harry Styles." She said, "Mom, can I go talk to him?" And my mom's like, "Sure, I don't know who that is." And then she just froze. because in his presence, she was breathless. Now the illustration breaks down, but the Queen of Sheba, for non-physical reasons, looks and sees Solomon in all of his splendor, and she's breathless. Verse 6 and 7 say to the effect, what I heard 1,500 miles away, it's true. I didn't believe it, but then I came here to see with my eyes. All the reports were only half true. You're 2 times better than I realized. I'm awestruck, I'm astonished, I'm breathless. And then what she does from there is awesome. She blesses. Verse 9, she says, blessed be the Lord, your God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. Keep in mind, this is the nation and or country she's coming from wasn't identifying with Yahweh, identifying with Solomon's God. And she travels all these miles and she sees Solomon in all his splendor, and she doesn't say, you're so lucky. What are the tips you did to get there? No, she says, you're not lucky. You're loved by God. You have a God and I'm interested in him. He cares for you and he controls reality. So I'll bless him. Do you see it? She's not just breathless, or she doesn't just bless, but she's also bountiful. She gave the king 120 talents of gold. Again, I said it earlier, that's almost $250 million worth of gold. Now, it was normal for kings to exchange gifts when they saw each other, like, oh, nice to meet you, here's a coffee mug. That was normal. But this is exceptional. This is next level. Solomon, you're more than a trustworthy trade partner. You're so reputable and intellectual and charitable. Honestly, my resources, I trust them in your hands more than mine. I've never met a leader like you. My finances free up in your presence. Do you see it? Cool story, right? She made the journey, saw him, he was awesome, goes back home. The end. That's the kind of leader you want to be. Reputable, intellectual, charitable. But there's a big problem here. We'll get to it in a couple of weeks. But when you read the life of Solomon, he didn't stay like this. When you look into your own heart, I bet you don't feel like this. And when I look at mine, I know I'm not like this. In other words, there's a gap from who I was meant to be and supposed to be, and I'm far from it. So if I can't become a king like that, and neither can you, and I can't get a caravan of camels to find one, then where in the world do I look? What in the world is my hope in life? Funny enough, Jesus actually mentions this story, this moment. In the same way folks were flocking to Solomon, folks were flocking to Jesus. He had a big reputation. And one day a group of antagonists come up to Jesus. We're gonna get him, let's do it. They come up to him, they say, prove yourself, show us a sign, Jesus. Jesus responds, an evil generation seeks a sign. Luke 11:31, the queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. You know what he's saying right there? You're looking for a sign? You want a sign? He says, look. The word behold is literally look. Look. Sign's right here. Sign's standing right in front of you. Jesus isn't just a good king. He's the greater king. He's the greatest king. Your boys used to be impressed with Solomon. Guess what? Someone greater than Solomon is here. And it's interesting. He says the Queen of Sheba will rise up at judgment and condemn you because she traveled the ends of the earth. What's going on? He's saying at the end of days, remember that queen, the queen of the south, the OG Spice Queen? She's gonna rise up at judgment. Why? Because she traveled 1,500 miles, dirt all on her legs, camels for days, just to see the splendor of Solomon. And you're standing right in front of someone greater than Solomon and don't want him. You're right here. Look at me. I'm not just a good example. I'm a saving grace. The greater Solomon has come. So if he's the greater Solomon, let's look at him. If that was a good king's example, oh boy, Jesus is a good example, but man, he has grace. So this is a greater king's grace. Let's look at Jesus. First, in the same way Solomon was reputable, guess who also is reputable? Jesus. Jesus is reputable. Matter of fact, no one has ever been so reputable as Jesus. Like Solomon, folks flock to him. Luke 4. A report about him went out throughout all the surrounding country, and he taught in their synagogues, being praised by all. Matthew 4, his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick. You see it? Folks traveling far and wide, hundreds, no thousands, Jew, Gentile, believer, non-believer, prostitute, professor. I need to see this man. Does he live up to the hype? What'd they find? Oh, someone who is pure, perfect and pure, spotless and sinless. As Peter described him, he committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. The only accusation people had against him is, bro, you're healing, but on the wrong day. He was utterly reputable. If Solomon's fame was fully for God, Jesus was fully God. Jesus was reputable and still is. No one changed history like Jesus Christ, and no argument has ended him. His reputation has lasted through your great-grandmother's generation, your grandmother's generation, your mother's generation, your kids' generation, your grandkids' generation. Why? Because no one is as reputable as Jesus Christ. We have a friend who's in her 60s and 70s, and she didn't know about Jesus, I think, most of her life. And then she came across a TV show about Jesus, and she just binged it. She said, I can't get enough of this man. He's the best protagonist ever. And then finally she started picking up the book, and she's like, it's true. No one is as reputable as Jesus. But Jesus is not just reputable. Oh, he's also intellectual. Do you know Jesus is intelligent and brilliant? Luke 2, this is talking about Jesus as a boy. They found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to him and asking him questions. And all who heard him, talking about Jesus, all who heard Jesus, again, there's a bunch of intellectuals around, and Jesus as a boy, all who heard Jesus were amazed at his understanding and his answers. You see that? Matthew 7, after arguably the greatest sermon in human history, the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished at his teaching. Mark and Luke both include different moments of the crowd hearing his teaching and saying they were astonished. John 7, this is my favorite moment. The Pharisees trying to trap Jesus, trying to get him. And they send, some direct reports, some officers to find Jesus and arrest him and bring him back. The problem is, not too long after that, the officers come back and the Pharisees are like, did you do your job? Where's the man? They don't have Jesus with them. And they respond, no one ever talked like him. I've never seen someone talk like this. I've never seen someone teach like this. Arrest him? More like he just arrested my heart and my mind. Jesus, simply put, was a genius. A genius, by definition, is someone who understands complexities and makes them simplicities for dumb people like me. And throughout the Gospels, when Jesus is teaching, that's exactly what he's doing. He's taking the complexities of eternity, of who God is, of what it means to be human and what it means to walk through life, and simplifying them down into a farming story for dumb folk like me and you. Jesus was a genius. This is one of my favorite quotes from a writer named Dallas Willard. He says this: if you play a game of word association today, in almost any setting, you'll collect some familiar names around words such as smart, knowledgeable, intelligent, and so forth. What comes to mind is Einstein, Bill Gates of Microsoft, and the obligatory rocket scientists will stand out. But one person who pretty certainly will not come up in this connection is Jesus. Here is a profoundly significant fact. In our culture, among Christians and non-Christians alike, Jesus Christ is automatically disassociated from brilliance or intellectual capacity. Not 1 in 1,000 will spontaneously think of him in conjunction with words such as well-informed, brilliant, or smart. What he's saying there is, if we did an exercise right now and we all handed out a blank piece of paper and said, write the top 3 smartest people who have ever lived, almost none would write Jesus. And then he goes on to say, I love this part, can we seriously imagine that Jesus could be Lord if he were not smart? If he were divine, would he be dumb or uninformed? Once you stop to think about it, how could he be what we take him to be in all other respects and not be the best informed and most intelligent person of all? The smartest person who ever lived. In other words, if you're going to accept Jesus as Lord and fully God, you got to accept him as smart and genius. Come to him with your hard questions. Come to him with your curiosity. And what will you find? You'll find someone who has never been so intellectually satisfying. More than Einstein, more than any of these other voices. You'll find someone who welcomes your questions, who welcomes your doubts and satisfies your questions. Solomon answered all of the Queen of Sheba's questions. Oh, boy, does Jesus want to answer some questions for you. But Jesus wasn't just reputable or intellectual. Oh boy, he was charitable. No one has ever been so charitable as Jesus. He was charitable towards the crowds. In the same way, remember when the Queen of Sheba got to Solomon, she looks around and she sees how much he cares for everyone he leads. Matthew 9, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had hate for them. No. When Jesus looked out at the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. He loved the crowds. He was charitable towards those in shame, the demon-possessed boy, the despised tax collector committing financial fraud, the prostitute woman. If you were unwanted and hurting, you know what Jesus' heart did? Moved towards you. He was charitable towards his friends. He didn't say, oh, you guys, wash my feet. Look how they look today. No, he stooped down low and washed theirs. He was charitable towards his enemies, the same people who put him up on a cross in his last moment. You know what he prays? Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they do. No leader nor king has ever been as loving and as charitable as Jesus Christ. He's the good leader you've been looking for your whole life. John 10, let this verse echo throughout the entirety of your life. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. In other words, I am the good leader. And notice he doesn't say, I am a good shepherd or a good leader. I am the good shepherd. The leader and king you've been looking for your entire life, I'm him. And what does the good shepherd do? The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Jesus is the greater Solomon. Why? Because he didn't just write a charitable check. He gave his life. He didn't just tithe his blood, he let it spill all out. Why? So that me and you could come into his kingdom and be led by him. Do you see it? The greater Solomon is here. And he's not just a good example, he's saving grace. I love in that moment when they're trying to trap Jesus, of like, show us a sign. He says, in the same breath, he says, the greater Solomon is here, but then he also says, the greater Jonah's here. You're seeking for a sign? Think about Jonah. The greater Jonah's here. Who was Jonah? A prophet of God who was on a ship. In the wrath of a storm, everyone was about to die. And in a moment of love, Jonah jumps off the ship into the wrath of the storm, stays in the belly of a whale for 3 days and 3 nights, and then bursts forth, proving that God rules reality and reigns over death. Greater Jonah's here. Didn't jump into the wrath of an ocean, jumped into the wrath of God that was coming towards sinners like you and me. Why? To save us. Was in not the belly of a whale, but the belly of a grave, 3 days and 3 nights. And then what happened from there? Bursts forth into life so that Jesus reigns over death. You want a great king? Look at him. You want a good leader? The greater Solomon's here. You want a great savior? The greater Jonah's here. The love you've been looking for, the leadership you've been looking for your entire life is Jesus Christ. Utterly reputable, utterly intellectually, and utterly charitable. There's never been anyone like him. And when you see that, when you see him for who he truly is, welcoming all, you'll marvel. The Queen of Sheba, remember? She traveled all this way to stand in front of Solomon, his majesty, and she was breathless. When you see Jesus for who he truly is, maybe it's 2 steps, maybe it's 1 step, maybe it's hearing a sermon or reading a scripture, and you see him for who he rightly is, there's only one response: marvel, breathless. I've never met someone like you. I had the opportunity of going back to preach where I went to undergrad last week, and it's incredible. If you don't know, God is just moving amongst college campuses across the country, and the biggest college ministry that I would go to whenever I was there was like 200-300 people. And the one we went to last week was doing an average attendance of like 1,400 students at a party school. And we just had the opportunity, it's cool. And we had the opportunity, and I just talked about Jesus. I just read and taught a story about how Jesus wants a woman who's shackled in shame and unwanted, who thinks no one in her life wants anything to do with her, but he does. And I remember there was a boy who just came up to me after, and he just awkwardly stood in front of me for 2 minutes, and he's just shaking, and his shirt was soaking wet, not from sweat, but from tears, a big college boy. And he was shaking. I'm like, what's your name? And he just couldn't talk. He was breathless. And then finally he's just like, Jesus, man, Jesus. I'm like, yeah. He's like, Jesus, I've never seen anyone like him. He's wonderful, he's marvelous. I see him. When you see him for who he truly is, you'll be breathless. You'll marvel. As the old hymn goes, I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene and wonder, how could he love me, a sinner condemned unclean? How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. Is it your song? Have you met him? If you have, you'll marvel. Amen? Amen.